What's up, boys and girls? CheFPV here, Zero Ground FPV. Check it out. On the bench, we've got a couple of different flight controllers. And I wanted to just go through kind of a spotlight as far as flight controller and how and why I choose the flight controllers I do. And just things that people probably should consider in choosing their flight controllers. It's a confusing world out there, I understand. People coming into the kind of hobby and getting involved in this building and stuff may not have a full understanding of what the difference between hardware and software are when it comes to flight controllers. So hardware is your board. The board can be any kind of board for the most part, and any firmware for the most part can run on any board. The only caveat really to that is obviously you can't run KISS firmware on a separate type of board. However, you can run Beta Flight or Clean Flight on a KISS. You could also run Race Flight. And you subsequently also couldn't run Race Flight on other boards that are not, compatible with Race Flight. But if you're sticking with Beta Flight and you're sticking with Clean Flight, which I recommend, I actually recommend Beta Flight. Any board should work, and any board can be flashed with Beta Flight. So don't limit yourself to board choice specifically based off of firmware. Make sure the board you choose fits your build, and then make sure that obviously it also fits the firmware. So that's how I choose my boards. I typically will only run a specific type of flight controller, but I have gone and used some other ones and things because obviously I want to test, and not only that, but I get my hands on them, and I'm not going to just toss a flight controller away. And I've gone through so many different boards until I found which I really like that I do have an excess of other old boards. So like when one of my good boards goes bad, I pull one off of the bench from an old one, like an old SP3 or something. So what are the factors that I use to determine what board I'm going to use? My first number one factor, I want high voltage. I prefer a high voltage board for a lot of reasons. Some people will tell you that pumping high voltage into your flight controller is a waste and it's can cause other problems and all that. I can tell you that in my experience, high voltage flight controllers are much more reliable. You don't have to worry about voltage spikes. You don't have to worry about accidentally overpowering it. And most importantly, the build can be super clean because you can use a basic PDB. I am of the mentality that the more simple you can keep the wiring, the more simple you can keep the build, the less likely you are to fry components or come up with issues. I have only had one ESC fire. It actually happened 2 days ago. Actually, two, I'm sorry. And both ESC fires were caused by a positive pad being ripped off and the contact being made with the frame, which then sent sparks up and caused a fire. I have never blown an ESC mid-flight. I have never blown a VTX due to voltage spikes. And I have never ran a capacitor on any of my builds. So I just know what my experience is, and that is that a high voltage flight controller coupled with a high voltage VTX and a high voltage camera eliminates so many problem areas off of PDBs. Like that's a PDB, right? With 5 volt, 12 volt and all that. It's a great one. It's an MRM one. This one actually has been submerged. That's why it looks so gross. That's actually a bunch of corrosion on the pads. But this board has all kinds of components on it. If one component goes bad, the whole build is bad, right? So I would much rather just use this and choose my flight controller based around the simplistic build technique that I want. So I use a high voltage Unify Pro Race is my new VTX of choice. And I use a run cam that's a high voltage. I prefer a camera that goes up to 22 volts. Only because then I definitely don't have to worry about voltage spikes. However, I've never had a problem with a 17-volt camera having a voltage spike and dying. So first, number one thing for me, high voltage. So for me, in this pile, that would be a KISS and a Lux. So both of these are going to be very similar looking. They're not identical, and the layout is actually completely different. They both also have completely different hardware on board. The KISS has the 6,000 MPU gyro, whereas the Lux V1 has the 6,500 SPI or whatever it is, SPI or MPU gyro. So this gyro actually typically needs some soft mounting. It's definitely more sensitive. It does not like vibration, and a lot of people have had problems with this gyro. The Lux V2, on the other hand, has the new or the 6000 SPI MPU gyro, and therefore it actually is a much cleaner build for gyro oscillations and stuff like that. But both of these, for me, are my main two kind of choices when it comes to a high voltage flight controller. There is a third one, which I have somewhere and I couldn't find it, but it's a Tempest. And the Tempest, the great thing about it is it actually has the PDB and everything in line. And you also have, I believe, a Combini to choose from in a high voltage setup. All of those I think are going to be great options. I've used all of them except for the Combini, but I know plenty of people that have. And everybody swears by those as far as high voltage. For me, though, a KISS would be probably my recommended go-to. Now, this brings up the next kind of problem or concern or, question that I ask myself. Pin layout is going to be the other biggest difference between flight controllers. So pin layout, as in where are the pins located for each motor pad. So for this one, they're actually at the corners and they're labeled per motor on the Lux. And that's great. It's one thing that I think puts this board over this one. It's why I would choose a Lux V2 over a KISS. I like the pad layout much better on the Lux. The KISS one, though, it's not bad. They're all along the backside rail and they're on the top and the bottom, which does make for a nice clean build if you run your wires that way. The only kind of thing that I don't like about it is I like my wires on my ESCs to all be the same length. Because the problem is if I cut some short for this one and then I take this board and throw it out and put another board in it, I might have to change my ESC wires. So one of the reasons I really love the Lux is it just makes it simple and I can keep all my wires symmetrical and all that. And if I have to switch to another board, I can. That being said, even with this one, if I have my wires cut short here and I switch to a KISS, I'm going to have to extend a couple of wires. But just something to think about. And then same thing here with some of these boards. So I've got a Calibri, I've got a MRM Mantis, which is an SP3 basically. I've got a CC3D, which is facing the right direction there. I've got a SP3 Evo right there. And here is your Hyperlight F4. So the Hyperlight F4 is a CC3D Revolution board that's been reworked. They pulled the schematics, they reworked the board and rearranged it and made it kind of a cleaner build for what they say, took a couple sensors off, and this is a Revo F4. This is a great F4 board. This is my recommended F4 board. The only issue with it is in a couple of crashes I have had the gyro separate slightly and had to replace it. So that being said, for the price, PyroFlip RC has these and some other vendors. I personally would recommend this one. Notice the pin layout is on the right side with the board facing forward. This one is the Mantis. It actually has the motor pads on the back side, much like the KISS when it's facing forward. Calibri, now this is going to be one that you're going to actually need to use the stack from the TBS Power Cube. However, you could use some of these UARTs and all the other plugs, I believe, if you needed to run it a different way. But the Calibri FC is actually for the stack of the Power Cube. But I just wanted to show it there. The SP3 Racing, this is an Evo, I think. I'm not sure. This is an old SP3 Racing, one of the V1s. Its motor pads, again, on the front. USB on the back. Another thing to consider, USB is on the side on the Mantis, and it's on the back on the Pyro Flip. And then we have the tried and trusty CC3D original board. So this one, while facing forward, has motor tabs on the right. USB is in the back. It is a full-size, well, whatever it is, the original mini USB or whatever. This is a F1 board in theory. However, the CC3D is actually a very powerful board. It's got black box on board. It's got telemetry and all that stuff here that you can use. So there's lots of people still running CC3Ds, and they're actually a nice solid setup if you get it set up with your firmware that you want. So those are all the things to consider. USB, motor pad placement. Obviously, do you want an F3 or an F4? I personally would run an F4 if you could find one, if it's got everything you need. But being that I like high voltage, I am much more happy with an F3 high voltage board. So again, these are just the way that I kind of look at boards and the way that I consider what I need. Black box is something that I would recommend getting a board that has onboard storage, but it's not necessary. Black box tuning, obviously people swear by it and say that it's the best way. I personally don't use black box tuning that much. It is great though for isolating problems. So I'm not going to recommend don't worry about it, but I wouldn't buy a board only because, hey, I have to have black box. For me, high voltage, pin layout, USB layout, those are my key features that I'm looking for. So that's all, man. I hope I helped some guys make some decisions, guys and gals. And I hope you have any questions, let me know. Fly safe, fly smart, just fly. Peace.